In this episode, we've got the release of RAD Studio 10.3.3, RAD Server on Docker and why you might care about that even if you don't use RAD Server, CodeRage 2019, and Interbase Temporary Tables. Hi, welcome to this month in RAD Studio for November. My name's Malcolm Groves from Code Partners. Glad you could join us. First up this month, we've got the release of RAD Studio 10.3.3, which obviously includes Delphi 10.3.3 and C++ Builder 10.3.3. You've possibly already seen some news about this. There's been lots of posts and videos and yesterday there was a webinar, there's emails gone out from Embarcadero and from us. So there's a good chance you've already seen this stuff, so I don't plan on spending a lot of time on this. Serena DuPont's actually done a really good short overview video just highlighting sort of the main points, which if you're not aware, the highlight sort of features are Android 64-bit support for Delphi, the iOS 13 and macOS Catalina support, RAD Server in Docker, which we're going to talk about in a second, and also the sort of the rolling in of the enterprise connectors into the standard install for enterprise and architect, plus the usual, couple hundred updates and fixes and tweaks and those sorts of things. So I'm not going to spend a bunch of time talking about it. There's a link to a post we did on the day it came out in the show notes below. In there we've got links to downloads to the other blog posts about it, that kind of stuff. So you can go there for more information. As I mentioned, there was also a webinar that happened yesterday, I think, or overnight. So the replay for that should be available, so that'll go into it in much more detail. But just in general, what I've seen reported from customers and also what I've experienced, even if you're not interested in those sort of top-level features, generally the IDE experience seems to be much slicker and much smoother. Even things that maybe seem minor, but in previous releases, if you switched between desktops or those sorts of things, there was often a lot of flashing and a lot of flickering for a second or two while it all sort of settled down before you could move on. That's all, in my experience and what I've seen posted from other people, that all seems to have been resolved. So just generally a nicer experience in the IDE. And as I say, a couple of hundred fixes, both customer reported and also internally reported fixes. So if you're using 10.3, definitely worth having a look at. If you're not using 10.3, if you're on an earlier version, this might be an interesting time to jump in. A lot of the issues that people were first reporting seem to have been resolved. So now might be a safe time to move in where you can avoid all of those. As I said, there's a link in the show notes below to a post we did which we're keeping up to date with all of the other information that comes out about it. Okay. As I just mentioned, one of those features is RAD Server in Docker. Now, if you're what does this mean? If you're a RAD Server user or you've started playing with RAD Server, I think one of the things that has made RAD Server maybe a little bit challenging in the past, or maybe a little bit unapproachable, is the deployment story. Development's pretty easy because you can just F9 in the IDE and it'll start up a little test server. Deployment has been a little bit more challenging. You've got various pieces you've got to install. You've got to have Interbase installed on the server. You've got to have Apache and load your Apache modules in, for example. So it has been a little bit tricky. So one thing it means if you're a RAD Server user is that deployment just suddenly got a lot easier. Effectively deploying into production using this Docker image becomes a case of supplying your license and away you go. There's Embarcadero have put 3 Docker images up in Docker Hub, publicly available. So at a minimum, you can, with one Docker command, you can pull down that image, start it up. Maybe the first time in production, you have to start it up interactively and supply your license, but then subsequent times you're just good to go. So that's really interesting if you're a RAD Server user. What if you're not a RAD Server user? Why do you even care about this? Maybe you switched off a minute ago when I started talking about it, but you shouldn't have. There's actually something interesting in here which I didn't realize they were doing, which is really cool for people, even if you're not using RAD Server. If you remember a few versions back, I can't remember when, the Delphi support for Linux rolled in. Yeah, and then in a version very recently, the GUI, FireMonkey GUI support for Linux was rolled in. Yeah, so now we can build GUI applications in Delphi for Linux. Awesome. To play with this, maybe you've thought about setting up a Linux install inside VirtualBox or VMware or something like that, setting up all of the requirements, all that sort of thing, just so you can play with Delphi on Linux. No need anymore. If you've got Docker installed, one of the images they uploaded has nothing to do with RAD Server. It's just like a base Linux install with PA server and another thing called Broadway D. Now, what this means is with a single Docker command, you can start up a Linux container. Yeah, and so if you're building command line applications with Delphi for Linux, you can immediately, with PA server in the image, you can immediately from the IDE kick this off, have it start up, connect to PA server, deploy your binary, see it running at the command line. Yeah, that's pretty cool. What's even cooler is because they've included Broadway D, you can now do it for GUI applications. So if you've built a FireMonkey Linux GUI application, you can now deploy that with a single Docker command. You can now start up a container, and then from the IDE, even on F9 if you want to, deploy into that Docker container, start up the GUI. Yep, you won't see it at the Docker command prompt because that's a command line, but because Broadway D is involved, you can point your browser at that at the right URL, and you can see and interact with your GUIs, with your application's GUI. Yeah, really cool. Nice little surprise. I haven't seen anybody talking about it. If I don't see an example of this soon, there might be one in last night's webinar, but if I don't see a video of an example of this soon, I might dive in and create a quick one because it's really, really cool. Yeah. So even if you're not interested in RAD Server, if you want to play with Linux, there's now a super easy way. Don't muck around with VirtualBox. Don't muck around with installing a full Linux. Just if you've got Docker installed, one line, bang, you're good to go. Another thing that kind of crept up on me a little bit this year was CodeRage. Normally around this time of year we have CodeRage, and normally it's like a 1 week thing where Jim and a bunch of other people don't get any sleep while they're running CodeRage videos around the clock. Yeah, that's not what it is this year. It is CodeRage, but its format is changed. They're shorter videos, which means they're kind of more bite-sized. You can dive in and watch a 10-minute video on something to get a bit of a peek of what something's about, and then dive deeper if you need to. Yeah. Secondly, it goes for nearly 2 months. Yeah, it's already been running through most of November. I think it started in October sometime, and it goes through until about the week before Christmas. I've put a link to the page with all of the sessions. Each week is kind of themed, and so they'll do a bunch of videos and topics in that similar theme. Like one might be around C++, one might be around data, those sorts of things. And then at the end of the week, you can dive in and watch the videos at any point during the week. And then at the end of the week, they have like a combined Q&A panel kind of thing where you can go in and get your questions asked. So it's an interesting change in format. As I say, it kind of crept up on me this year. I didn't really see as much about it as I have in previous years. Maybe that's just me being out of it a bit. But anyway, it's on. Link in the session notes. Go along. There's always good information in these things, so go along and try out the new format a bit this year. Lastly, Stephen Ball has a new post up on Interbase. Now, nice to see Stephen back in this around these tools. That's a welcome change. Secondly, he's talking about a feature of Interbase called Temporary Tables. Now, Temporary Tables have been around for a long time, but it's not a terribly well-known feature of Interbase. So he's written up a post about using these. There's a link in the show notes below. I think there's maybe even a video on it. So check that out if you're using Interbase or if you're curious about Interbase. The other thing around Interbase is that it kind of played in the 10.3.3 launch. It kind of got drowned out a little bit by all the other news, but one of the items that came out at the same time as 10.3.3 was Interbase 2020, which has, amongst its new features, has this interesting piece called table spaces. So in Stephen's post, he also makes reference to table spaces and links off to some more information. So if you're using Interbase, and I know a lot of Delphi customers who are building Delphi customers who are ISVs who are building applications that they then sell on to other people. I know many of those have used Interbase embedded inside it because it's nice and low admin. It just works. It's no fuss. Their customers don't have to worry about a database. If you're in that situation, or if you've been curious about Interbase, go and check out Stephen's post. Welcome him back to the RAD Studio and Interbase worlds, and have a look at both the temporary tables, which if you're using Interbase, you possibly already have access to, and the new Interbase 2020 table spaces feature. That's probably enough for this month. As always, feedback is very welcome. There's links below to all the various places you can give us feedback. If you'd like to be notified of new videos as they come available, please, there's two things you need to do. Please subscribe to the channel here on YouTube, but also you'll need to click that little bell icon up in the top right corner. That'll actually make sure you get notified of new videos that we post. If you've enjoyed this, have a look through the rest of the Co-Partners channel here on YouTube. Lots of other videos that hopefully you'll also find interesting. With that out of the way, hope you have a great month. It's certainly getting warm in my part of the world. But wherever you are, enjoy the rest of the month. Happy coding, and hope to see you here next month in RAD Studio. Cheers.